Good to go. So I'm excited to kick off today's fireside chat once again with Matt Conwell from RareBreed VC. Our webinar will be hosted by Beji Yang, managing partner here at 500 Startups. For those of you who just joined, my name is Vanessa Samaniego, and I am in charge of operations for 500's investor education programs. We'll be taking questions throughout the presentation. However, I really want to ask that you use the Q&A function, which is what we'll be monitoring. So Mac and Beji will presenting for about 25 to 30 minutes. And at the end of the webinar, we have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience. Before we get to the webinar, I wanted to speak a little bit about our upcoming VC Unlocked Silicon Valley online program in collaboration with the Stanford Center for Professional Development. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are taking this celebrated investor education program virtual, and we're really excited about that. We're going to be covering the same material, everything from fund formation to cap table modeling to deal flow frameworks. And I'll drop a link into the chat in just a second if you want to learn more. So I'll just keep an eye out for that. The program is going to take place this October 5th through the 16th. And early application deadline, as well as our diversity scholarship deadline, is this Friday, August 21st. So please get in your applications if you are interested. The program is designed for serious investors that want to strengthen their ability to define, negotiate, and execute early stage investments. And of course, please feel free to reach out to us with any email, any questions to vcunlocked@500startups.com. With all that said, I'd like to hand it over to Beji now for this fireside chat with Mac. So welcome again and looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to interview Mac in today's session. My name is Beji Yang. I am managing partner of 500 Startups. I joined 500 to start doing a lot of the international investments that we have. So, and especially thinking outside of Silicon Valley, right? And that gave me the entire journey. And particularly, like later on, I started this program called VC Unlocked, that we're unlocking a lot of the knowledge and network that we have learned through all our investments. We have done over 2,500 investments around the world in 75 countries. And I'm very excited to introduce and interview Mac. Mac Conwell is founding partner at RareBreed VC. RareBreed VC is a pre-seed fund that is investing in exceptional founders outside of the large tech ecosystems, right? We often think about Silicon Valley, New York, but it's really exciting to see really great investors to also be in like different parts of the world. That's part of our job as well. So really exciting to see the up and coming sort of fund managers doing that. Additional sort of bio from Mac. Mac has a really strong background, especially in the entrepreneurial component and working a lot with the government sort of entities. So he previously co-founded Given.to and also founded RareBreed, both of which were accepted into the low tech ecosystem accelerators. And prior to that, working with consulting, and particularly with the Booz Allen Hamilton before joining the co-op program with the development of, with the Department of Defense. And then sort of recently, most recently with TEDCO, which is the Maryland Technology Development Corporation. So the first thing I'd love to do is, Mac, for you to sort of talk through a little bit of your journey of how you are where you are today.
Yeah, so I'll give everybody the quick background, and thank you. Beji kind of touched on everything in my bio, but I'll tell you in my own words. So I'm a software engineer by trade. I went to school for computer science. My sophomore year of school, I got an internship with the Department of Defense, and I got a top secret clearance, which meant my junior year of school, I dropped out because Northrop Grumman offered me a bunch of money. So I spent 7 years as a government contractor after that. My last stint was at Booz Allen Hamilton. I was one of the youngest hiring managers in the East Coast region. And then in 2010, me and two of my best friends decided we were going to start a startup. The funny thing is, though, at the time, we didn't know what a startup was. We didn't know what startup was. I didn't know what networking was. We were just like 3 engineers building something. I went on to become CEO because I was the only one of the team who didn't mind talking to people. So we spent 4.5 years growing that company. We went through 2 accelerators, one in Baltimore, one in San Francisco, had a pivot, and then eventually sold that technology off to a division of a Fortune 100 company. And that was really cool, and I learned a lot. After that, I started my second company, which was RareBreed. put a team together, raised some money, got into an accelerator, this time in Philadelphia, and my team fell apart, right? So I had a win and a loss. After that, I came back to Baltimore, was doing some work before I found my way to TEDCO, or the Maryland Technology Development Corporation. It's essentially the investment arm for the state of Maryland. We get $21 million annually to put in early stage tech companies across 9 different funding programs. When I got there, I was originally on the seed investment team, sourcing deals, doing due diligence. I was part of the investment committee. And I got hired in 2016. Well, when they hired me, they were also having issues of investing in Black-led companies. And so in 2017, I actually started a pre-seed fund there at the organization specifically for Black-led startups to help try to institutionalize the friends and family round, doing $40,000 investments to kind of help companies get the seed. That first year we did really well. The second year, we increased the designation to women and all minority groups. And we added some wraparound services. And then in 2019, the state of Maryland added $1 million to the annual budget to make it a long-term frontier state. It's the first and only state-backed pre-seed fund for women and minorities in the country, something I'm really proud of. And it's what's helped propel me to now starting my own pre-seed fund, RareBreed VC. And so it was during that journey of knowing that I was thinking about raising a fund, but I need some more education along the way. Like raising a fund through the state is really different. I just got to talk to legislators and I make a case for why we need this money. It's very different than going out to high net worth individuals and family offices and LPs and pitching. And I needed to learn some of that. So that's how I made my way to, VC Unlocked. And I was lucky enough to get the scholarship. So, and that's where I got to meet Beji and the team, and, they've become part of my family now. It's been over a year, and we still talk fairly regularly. So I love it.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to have you part of the family, and it's been really impressive. I think the work that you've done for the ecosystem, and particularly creating the opportunities for underrepresented groups, and that's like so important sort of throughout. And very excited to see where you're going to take sort of RareBreed VC, because that's part of your thesis as well, right?
Yeah, so my thesis is I don't have a diversity designation, but I do talk about investing in entrepreneurs who are under networked, right? Yeah. So, being in Baltimore and investing for the state of Maryland, very quickly you get to see, these entrepreneurs are just one step behind due to the lack of access, or we'll find amazing entrepreneurs building great companies that don't have access to the networks to get them access to capital, or get them access to top tier customers and things like that. And so, finding those hidden gems, I mean, one, from a venture standpoint, makes financial sense because you can get into those deals earlier and cheaper, right? Mm-hmm. So like from a financial return standpoint, that makes sense. But then also you get to start to build companies that look different than what you typically see in Silicon Valley. And I'll give you an example, right? In Birmingham, Alabama, right? In Birmingham, Alabama, there's a company called Shipt. What they do is they're a delivery service. Well, Shipt got acquired by Target for $550 million, right? That's a really impressive exit. And it's in the middle of Birmingham. $550 million goes a lot further in Birmingham than it does in San Francisco, right?
For sure.
And so, those are the type of companies, I'm looking to find and back. And, those are the type of companies and entrepreneurs.
That's awesome. One key component on building the fund that we talk a lot about is the superpower. And then also building the brand. It's like really impressive, the network that you built through Twitter. So I'd love for you to sort of walk us through, how do you think about sort of brand building? Which tools do you use? And what do you believe is your superpower?
All right, so I'll talk about brand building, which is, everybody wants to talk to me about this these days because like very recently I've become more active on Twitter. And
you are a celebrity.
I'm not a celebrity.
You are. Like everyone just look at his Twitter. He's a celebrity.
It's interesting, but like over this past 2 months, I've gained over 10,000 followers. And really what it is me being consistent with my authentic voice. And so one thing I recognize, having been an entrepreneur and now on the venture side, I realize for me personally, there's just a lot of things about venture that we never talk about publicly. Like there's lots of ins and outs and little tricks to this game and how this works, and to the advice we give entrepreneurs that we never talk about. And so I started making it a point to talk about that on a consistent basis. So I talk a lot about what venture is, how venture works, why we do what we do in venture, and then I sprinkle in a little bit about my own personal journey, You know, I share some vulnerabilities. You know, I let entrepreneurs know, like, hey, I had to pitch to an LP recently and they told me no, and it sucked, right? Like a lot of entrepreneurs don't know that VCs have to raise funds. Well, managing partners, not all VCs ever have to raise. Like if you get to be part of a team that don't have to raise, be thankful, because it's not fun. But you know, talking about those experiences, and then being engaging, right? When entrepreneurs ask me questions, I answer. Like every now and then I'll put on Twitter, like, hey, what's the question you always wanted to ask the VC but was too scared to? And like those become really thoughtful, you know, Q&A sessions. Now, granted, they do eat up quite a bit of my time, but you know, it's a way for me to engage with entrepreneurs. And the best part about that is it does two things. One is it gives entrepreneurs a chance to see who I am and the way I think and how I can be supportive. And so when those entrepreneurs go to raise money, I become one of the investors they have on their short list of people they want to talk to or pitch to, right? The other thing is it also gets other investors to follow you. So the really cool thing about what's happening with me on Twitter is my network of VCs who I'm connected to now has grown like quadrupled over the last 2 months. And I've gotten a chance to meet and talk to a lot of these investors. And that's led to, you know, potential co-investments. That's led to new friendships. That's led to me finding a partner. And it's also led to me getting some money, you know? All those things happen purely from me engaging on Twitter. You can do the same thing with LinkedIn. I also did 2 Medium posts that did really well. So building your brand and building your voice, there's a lot that comes with it. You just want to make sure you're always being authentic. You want to make sure you're always speaking how you truly feel, and be careful not to get sucked up into it. Because like people will start to look at you as a celebrity. They want you to come and talk to everything. But at the end of the day, our core job as VCs is to invest in companies that are going to return capital. Like no matter how cool you are, no matter how many people like you, no matter how many tweets you put out, if you're not investing in companies that return capital, none of that's going to matter in the long run, right? And so always keeping an eye on that and using it as part of the strategy for that. My superpower is recognizing those hidden gems, right? So seeing entrepreneurs that may be have a company that most people might not see or most people might not think is investable, and being able to tell like that founder has something. Like it's not always the company has something, because you know, as a pre-seed investor, I invest so early, a lot of these companies are going to change, their strategies are going to morph, like all that stuff. So I optimize on the way founders think. And so if I give a quick story, my top performing company, it's a founder, it's a young Black kid out of Baltimore. I met him, he was a 17-year-old kid in high school, right? I stayed in touch with him, and you know, he called himself a growth hacker. He said he had 2 businesses before, like whatever, kid. But as it kept going, I stayed in touch with him. One day I checked up on him just to see, you know, if he figured out what he was going to do for college. He was like, back, I decided, you know, I'm going to start a startup. And, you know, I was like, great, tell me about it. It's like, it's going to be a common application for scholarships. Well, that's a terrible idea that's never going to make money. I already know that off the bat. This kid is in college. He doesn't really have time to work on a startup. Everything about this says red flag, no, no, no. But, you know, be supportive, talk to the kid, and give him honest feedback. So as he's talking, he tells me he got 25,000 users in his first 3 months. I'm like, that's interesting. Perfect. And he tells me he did it by using a Venmo hack. Like I had never heard anything like that. It was like one of the most impressive things I'd ever heard. And so in my mind, right then and there, I knew that in just about any room that kid walked into, he was going to be one of the smartest people in the room. I knew that right then and there. And it took me 6 months to convince my firm to make the investment. But we made the investment. He didn't even have a revenue strategy. You know, we were just trying to talk him out of only doing scholarships, but also doing student loans. He eventually did that. But he took our 40,000, went to New York and raised 600 from a bunch of ex-Goldman Sachs folks. Came back, we gave him another 50. He goes to YC. He comes out of YC and raises 2.5 on a $14 million post. Paul Graham, the founder of YC, personally put in a $100K check. GSV, one of the top ed tech investors in the country, led that round. You know, that kid is now on a rocket ship. And if you talk to him today, he'd tell you he probably never gets that company off the ground without that first 40,000. And if you read all the conventional things that investors put out, there's no way he should have got that money. But, you know, sometimes you just have to have conviction on those kinds of things. So that's my superpower.
Yeah, and then I think that also sort of talk through like the pre-seed, right? Because normally you would see a product or you see some early indicator of tractions, and then like you're giving us a little bit of fundamental of like what are you trying to sort of look through to cut out the noise and like find the best entrepreneurs. So when you were talking about the Twitter or like building the brand, you touched sort of few points. I'd love to double click on some of them. So there are three components. First is the fundraising, because I think for most of the people who want to be running their fund and breaking into the industry, the way to go around it is raising that. The second component I wanted to dive deeper, it's team. Like you started on your own, and I know that you're sort of putting the team together, and you mentioned like you've been sometimes meeting co-investors, sometimes even like finding the team members. So the second one I want to talk about is the team. And the third, where we will double click a little bit more, is how do you select the companies? I know you talked a little bit about like finding the right founders, but love to dive a little bit deeper. So, and we can always sort of tie into some of the sort of Twitter and the social media voice that you've been bringing and how you're tying that all together. So for those three components, let's start with the fundraising. Okay. So tell us about your experience on fundraising and using how did the first few checks come together, and how you're using different medium to like power up that capability.
So first and foremost, due to SEC rules, I am not technically fundraising.
Yes.
I have raised funds at some point.
Yes.
I cannot legally say I am currently fundraising or what my check sizes are. I can legally say though that my email address is mac@RareBreed VC, and I'm happy to have conversations with people one-on-one about this stuff. So the way Twitter has helped me is I recognize when I first started to raise, it was all by accident. I actually had an inbound conversation. I had a founder reach out to me on Twitter who I talked to, who I really loved his company. He was based in Dallas, Texas, and he was doing some great things. And he couldn't find funding. And then I realized the only reason he couldn't get funding is because he was a Latinx founder based in Dallas, Texas. And that was ridiculous to me. So I wanted to put a special purpose vehicle together to make a one-off investment. And as I was talking to my network, one of my advisors basically threw money at me and told me to go raise a fund instead. So that's what got me fundraising. This wasn't like a planned out thing. It just kind of happened. And so from there, I realized really quickly that my personal network could only get me to like 400,000 or 500,000, which is nowhere near the 10 million mark I wanted to get to, or at least like the 2 million first close I wanted to do. And so at the same time, I started getting more active on Twitter, and I started noticing more VCs were following me. And so I just made it a point that if you were a VC and you were following me, I would send you a message for us to connect. And so in the matter of a little more than 2.5 months, I had well over 600 meetings. I know it sounds like a lot, but you can do 20 to 24 meetings in a day thanks to Zoom. No bathroom breaks and, maybe one lunch break, but you can make it happen. I don't recommend doing it that way. I was a crazy person, decided this is what I was going to do.
So you were doing 20 meetings a day and then adding like 600 meetings in like 2 months.
Yes, I did that. But what happens is you meet a lot of cool people all across the globe, right? So Twitter is a global community. So I met with investors all over the world. And during that process, I met with people who introduced me to LPs. Mm-hmm. I met people who wanted to be LPs. Like, I met people who were like well-known names in Silicon Valley I'd send them a message on Twitter. We'd have a 30-minute meeting, and 5 days later, they send me an email, say, yes, I'm in, here's $100,000. I'm just like, wow. Like, I never experienced anything like that, especially as an entrepreneur, let alone trying to raise a fund. And so that became really powerful. And I continued. And once I saw that working, I just made that a thing, right? I continued that going. And it's been a really successful tool for me. There is a lot of noise. Like the majority of people you meet won't have any chance to be investors in you. But what they will do is most of the people I'm meeting with are VCs or angel investors. So now I have a network of over 400 co-investors, right? And during this process, a few companies out of my previous portfolio from the state, I was able to get like 4 of my companies funded throughout this process. Mm-hmm. Right? So like me meeting all these investors was like, there's always some value to gain. And so, that's how the fundraising things, Twitter's helped that a lot.
And then let's talk a little bit more then about team. So I think when you started, you were doing or thinking about it. And then at one moment you're like, okay, I don't think it's thinking about it. Let's just do this. And I've seen that multiple stages, right? Since you joined sort of VC Online. And then now I know you also like building a team, you have someone that you feel like really good on building the VC fund together, just sort of walk us through first a little bit of your journey between, yes, I'm thinking about it, and then it's like, I'm absolutely doing this. This is like no way back. And then like onboarding your vision with other people.
Yeah, so the team thing was interesting because there's a couple considerations to take when building a team, right? One, depending on the size of your fund is going to determine like how many team members you can have and pay, right? Having a $10 million fund is really hard to have more than one GP, and I knew that. So I knew if I brought on a team member, they would have to be somebody who could help me raise additional capital because we have to have a larger fund, or we'd have to figure out a structure. And number two, and what was really important for me was I had met several people over time that I talked to and thought about raising a fund with, but they had to be down for the thesis that I had, right? This thesis of one, I'm investing primarily outside of, San Francisco, New York, and Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And two, I'm also writing larger checks at pre-seed, so $250,000 checks. And I might write one or two $500,000 checks, right? Not everybody's up for that. Not everybody believes in that strategy. Not everybody thinks that's smart. And so I was very clear, like, if you work with me, these are two things that are non-negotiable. And so I got to the point where I was just going to do it on my own because I couldn't find the right fit. And what happened was, as I was going through this whole Twitter experience, I met a gentleman who worked at a firm in the Valley who, our first conversation was really cool. We talked, we got along. And then I stayed in touch, and like we talked again the same week. And then I found myself talking to him like twice a week. And like we'd always, talk through companies, talk through deals. Then he sent me a company that was too early for his firm, but like was perfect for me. Like was an amazing founder. And then I had him sit in on the meeting when I had that founder pitch me. And it was like, it just felt right. Now we did have to figure out a structure because he does currently have a job at a firm. But he has a job at a Series A firm, right? So he invests later stage. And there's a $10 million pre-seed fund, we're not going to have enough to like pay two GPs. Mm-hmm. And so we figured out a way where I'm able to give him a portion of the carry. He can be a part of the team. His firm is kind of written off on that. And it gives us a chance to work together. Because what I also know is I want to have a much larger fund too. But once you get over 20 million, your LPs typically want you to have a partner, right? And it's a lot harder when you just find a partner before you start the fund. They're going to want to know that you and that partner work together, you've done deals together, that kind of thing. So this actually allows us to spend some time together, work together for some years to see how we work, so that when fund two comes up, we have the story of one, we've been working together for a long time. And now we've been working together for a few years and done deals together. And two, there's overlap on our skill set. So I'm pre-seed and seed, he's seed and Series A, right? So now, as we start to build out a multi-stage firm going forward, we have the skill sets to fit it. So it just worked out that way. I got lucky, but that's what happens, right? Like you meet those type of people along the way, and a VC Unlocked, they'll tell you like there have been people who have found their partners during the class. The women from SoCal, that's where they met. That's how that fund came together, and so it kind of worked out organically, but the larger your fund is, the more team you need. And also doing all this stuff by yourself hurts. It's not easy. It's not fun. Like meeting entrepreneurs and writing checks, that's fun, right? Doing all the notes and all the administrative stuff, then you get to the back office stuff and dealing with LPs, like that's not fun.
Yeah, and then on finding a partner, like a lot of teams, you come together and that's it. Like once you raise a fund, it's like a 10 years endeavor together. So it's a very good sort of testing format where you can have, like you've been doing, right? Like you started the conversation and then like now it's closer and closer. And then you can say, okay, maybe for fund two, we can think about like sort of a co-GP component, but these are all the things that has worked on coming to this point. So that feels a lot more organic. And then a lot of the potential conflict and people's sort of strength sort of shows up on like what type of team you want to build, because it's really like a long journey. Like even with a smaller fund, like in our experience, like that still takes 10 years to like really see the results throughout, right? So it's very fun.
Can I make a point on that real quick though?
Yeah,
so we want to talk about the length of funds, right? So let's talk about 500 startups. like 500 stars was around before I started my first company. And actually a lot of my personal thesis comes from like early interactions I had with folks from 500, like back in like 2012-ish range. Keep in mind, their first fund is just getting to the end of its life cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
That's to speak to the length of time a fund is in these relationships. Like your fund is going to last longer than the average marriage in the United States.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like, keep that in mind. Whoever you bring on as team member, like y'all got to be together. Like by the time as long as this first fund closes and everything works out, when this first fund ends, like I'm gonna have kids in college.
Yeah, but it's like when you find the right partner, you're in the right partnership, and then you're like really like enjoying the work with the founders. It's such a rewarding job to be in, especially if you can be part of their journey, like in the early days, and then you see them go through the entire journey until they exit. Even when they fail and then they come back and do the second business, and you can be part of that journey. It's super, super rewarding. So talking a little bit about the finding the companies itself, I'd love to have you sort of talk through a little bit of like, now I think you already have sort of some pipeline, so give us a little bit of like the color of that sort of ideal deal that you are selecting. And then the second thing sort of associated with it that I didn't mention in your introduction is that you're also now a scout for Lightspeed, which is a later stage fund. So how would you sort of think through what's earlier stage, what's later stage, and how to like sort of wrap all those together? I think it's a good thing to be part of, for instance, like a scout program. So love to, but that's my impression, right? So talk us through that a little bit, and also like when you're thinking about like companies and framing the opportunity assessment of your sweet spot, just sort of walk us through that.
So first and foremost, the Lightspeed stuff, not tweetable. This is insider information, everybody. So trust y'all. Don't put that out. I'm not allowed to talk about any of that until September 15th. So just wait till I tweet it, then you can follow up and say you knew before everybody else. But this is for the 500 family here. So the way we find companies, like, you have to figure out your own way of going about deal flow, right? And I say your own way because there's a lot of ways to do it. Some people only get deal flow from top accelerators, right? Some people only get deal flow from, their local community, right? For me, I get deal flow from my network. So, top schools, local schools, schools that other VCs don't typically think about. Like every state has their big state school. And every single one of those schools, you can find an amazing entrepreneur. I promise you. You go to an entrepreneurship center, you talk to 20 entrepreneurs, you'll find one that you really like at any of the big state schools. I promise. The relationships you make with other VCs are going to be really important, especially the ones that are a stage above you, because when they find companies that are too early for them, if they have a strong relationship with you, they'll send them your way, right? That's been really great. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure you have a partner that also has access to deals that you might not have access to, right? So you want to make sure who's ever on your team, you're not all fishing in the same pond. I should tell everybody now, let the secret out. It's not that big of a secret. Pioneer.app, it's a virtual accelerator. There's going to be somebody who creates a thesis just off of investing in Pioneer companies. Like that's going to happen. Like there's some really amazing companies coming out of that accelerator because they have their leaderboard. Like it's a public leaderboard of which companies are doing the best. It's a pretty amazing setup. And so for me, I find a lot of companies, one, by going into different communities. And when you go into a new community, what you do is you start off with the accelerator or incubator there, you talk to the local tech leaders, and they kind of get you into the ecosystem, and then you do a talk or two. So like you go for a week or two, you set up like a talk or two talks where you just talk about venture, you talk about your fund, talk about yourself, do some office hours, and you'll very quickly start to network with some of these ecosystems, right? But don't discredit going the community route either, right? You'll get some really amazing deal flow going through like the large meetups, different meetup groups. Like if there's a Python meetup, or, if you're looking for diversity, if there's a Latin in tech meetup or a Black in tech meetup, go to those. Lesbian tech meetups, go to those. if you want to do Chamber of Commerce, like go speak at Chamber of Commerce. Like every Chamber of Commerce is going to want a VC to come and talk. And yes, a lot of people tell you it'd be a waste of time. I've got an amazing deal flow out of them. Why? Because business owners know business owners. So a lot of these big local business owners are going to have a friend who has working on an app that may be really interesting, right? And then, you know, going to the accelerators and like becoming a mentor and accelerator just means you get the first look at all the companies there, right? So you get to see them before their demo days. You get to see them before everybody else, right? You know, everybody loves YC, right? Here's the hard part about YC. If you're looking at companies on demo day, that means you're fighting hand-to-hand contact with every other investor there. So if you want to get into, you know, YC deals, that means you got to know the founders before they get in, or you got to know somebody who's going to make an introduction to that founder while they're going through the program. Otherwise, it becomes a completely different beast on demo day, right? And so networking into the right people that are going to send you deal flow becomes a big deal too. So like having a network and also coming up with your own proprietary deal flow, like how you meet entrepreneurs. And when you meet them, having a critical eye on what you like, right? And that just comes from like meeting as many founders as you possibly can, right? Like you're going to come up with patterns, you're going to come up with biases, and some of them are going to be strong. Like if it's an ed tech company that's selling directly K through 12, the very first question I'm gonna ask them is about their sales cycle, because most of those companies die because their sales cycles are too long, right? Like I just know that. And so it allows me to get through companies really quickly. So yeah, I gave a long answer on deal flow, but there you go.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful when sort of you talk through the deal flow. Then how do you select the companies? Like what's your, like one thing that we explore a lot during the VC Unlock, it's like an opportunity investment framework, right? Like what are the key components you're looking at, especially at the pre-seed?
Yeah, so this is something that I've honed in on over time and kind of came to me based on I looked at the companies I invested in and why I invested in them and what were the key things for me. And what came up were two things. If it's a software company, I like to see a clearly repeatable or unique customer acquisition strategy. Using Venmo to get 25,000 users is a really unique strategy. I'd get behind that all day. And then I like physical products, typically in consumer markets that have lacked innovation in 10 plus years, legacy markets, right? So physical products are a really hard plays. You kind of need to get to 2 million in revenue before you start seeing real capital come to them. But that's because they're really marketing plays. But when you start off with something that's in a legacy market, that means it's got people who are hungry for it. And it's going to take a competitor, you know, several months, if not several years to ramp up to try and catch you, right? So you get kind of this lead time to build up that marketing and brand play. But what I recognize more acutely is the founders who do one of those two things early on are out of the box thinkers and out of the box problem solvers. And so because I give a larger check at pre-seed, I want to bet on a founder that can be creative about solving all the problems along the way. And COVID's even, you know, made that bubble up. You know, for my founders who are really creative and have been since day one, when COVID happened, they figured out a way to keep growing, not just to stay afloat, but to keep growing, right? And so those are the founders I'm optimized for. But that's just my personal lens, right? You have to come up with your personal thesis and what it is that you look for and what you go after, right? And so, you know, that's how I evaluate companies really quickly. And I have to tell you, you know, very recently, me and my partner looked at two companies and we had money earmarked to do one deal. And we looked at each other like, okay, if we could pick one of these two, what would we do? Mm-hmm. And we both said both.
It's like, yes. You can only choose one. Yes. A or B, yes.
And it was just like, and sometimes that happens and that's hard. You have to make hard decisions. So what do? We have a thesis. We write $250,000 checks, but you also have to be flexible, right? So we took that check and cut it. And we cut it in a way to give it to the two companies. One company worked out for the other company, man, they negotiated the heck out of me. And I ended up giving them a much smaller check than I planned to. Mm-hmm. But I know acutely that because I gave that company a smaller check, I now have to add a lot of value to make sure I get my pro rata for the next round. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth it for me. So I already have to have a strategy ahead for how I get into this founder's next round. And me as a VC, I need to think that way. I can't just give this money and disappear until he raises more money. Be like, here, like this is a founder who's going to be able to get top tier investors along the way. So I have to make it worth his time to take my money. And so, you know, it's not always the fact that we have money, right? For some of the more, and I should be careful saying top companies. They're not necessarily top companies. They're the more hype companies or the companies that are better networked. And the better network companies, they're going to have a lot of options for money. So they got to figure out why they want to take your money. And honestly, when I have entrepreneurs pitch me, the last question I ask them every time is, why would you take money from RareBreed VC? And that's a really important question for us. And I'm getting the music played on me. I gotta stop talking.
No, thank you so much to both of you. This has all been so insightful. We are going to start jumping into Q&A from the audience. So again, if you have not submitted a question and would like to, please use the Q&A feature. And to kick it off with our first one, this will be a very easy one, Mac, but people are wondering how they can find you on Twitter.
So it's at Mac Conwell, or if you look up Mac the VC, you'll find me. But Mac Conwell, that's my name. I'll put it in the chat so everybody has it. There you go.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So leading to our second question, we have a question from Eric Lau, and he wanted to know, what advice do you wish you could give to your younger self?
The advice I wish I could have given to my younger self was spend more time getting to meet other investors and growing your network of VCs. Because as a pre-seed or early stage investor, right, we typically write some of the earlier checks. And so you don't really need anybody else around. Like, you write the check and you make it happen. But then when your companies go to raise more money, they come to you like, hey, who else can you introduce me to? And hopefully you have at minimum 10 people that you can send that company to that might actually write a check. The moment you realize you don't have that, it hurts, especially for me as a generalist, right? Like, I have companies that do all kinds of different things. So that means I need to be able to have other investors that do all kinds of different things too, right? Like, if I got a fintech company, I got to have a group of generalists and fintech investors at the seed or series A level that I can send my companies to help support them. I wish I had told myself that. And I wish I had told myself to spend more time understanding and learning all the ins and outs around the economics around venture capital. Like, I got a lot of that at VC Unlocked, but I wish I had known more of that day one. Day one, I just came in as like, hit the ground running, trying to meet as many founders as possible. And like, there's real value to that. But I didn't spend as much time learning the business of venture.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question from James Jones. As someone who has been on both sides, how do you view authenticity and transparency in context of negotiating in fundraising? Sometimes it can seem like founders are showing the best version of themselves and VC are just trying to get the best deal.
So that's going to happen, but that's what due diligence is for, right? And so what you find is every entrepreneur is delusional, right? Like, they have to be delusionally optimistic. That is their job. So it's your job in due diligence to figure out what's real and what's delusional, right? And so being authentic is, one, being upfront with founders of what you can and can't do. Being upfront about what value you will and won't be able to provide. And then if a founder's only showing you the best version of themselves, come up with a due diligence process where you feel like you can get all the information you need from a founder. But I'll tell you this, some VCs have a really stringent due diligence process. Depending on the type of companies you're trying to talk to, you want to be careful about that, right? You don't want a due diligence process that takes too long. Again, I'll give the example of YC, right? I met a company recently. They were 9 days away from demo day. I know for a fact they're going to get oversubscribed. And I knew that I had literally like 3 days to give them my answer to make sure I got a spot in that deal before there was no deal left. And so my due diligence process had to be shrunken. But I already had a process ready to go for that to happen, to really see the value in that company. So, really making sure, from a VC side, that you're being upfront and honest about who you are and what you can and can't do, and then taking some time to really try to do due diligence. And I'll tell you this, at the end of the day, most of us are just doing due diligence to make sure that this is really what we want to do. By the time you get to real due diligence or really doing reference calls and stuff like that, you already want to do the investment. Like, the only thing due diligence can do is lead you to a no. Like I've never done due diligence and it's helped me get to a yes, because I was already at a yes. I've only done due diligence where it's like, nah, I don't want to do this anymore.
Great, thank you. Next question. Who are the most important core team members for starting a state-backed fund?
The legislators, because they're the ones who are your bosses. That's like day in, day out, like that's who you respond to. And it's weird because for the state, the legislators determine how much money we get, or the governor puts in the budget. The legislators say yes or no. The attorney general's office is our lawyers. They're really like our closest team members. They're the ones who determine what kind of docs we do. So they're the ones who told us we can't do safes, right? So like whatever big conversations got to go through them. And then for internally, like running the firm, it's just like of any other venture firm, right? It's having your partners, it's having your associates, it's having somebody like depending, like because we get so much money every year, having people internally to handle operations. So, you know, having those executive assistants, having somebody to manage our sales force and make sure the data is cleaned up, because ain't nobody really got time to be chasing these companies down and making sure they're putting in all the data. Like there's somebody's full-time job is chasing down companies and making sure they're giving us the information for audits and things like that. But you know, for the firm itself, it's like any other firm, but like the people who matter are the governor, the legislators, and the attorney general's office, who are our lawyers.
Perfect, thank you. All right, I know we still have time for a few more questions. So can you go deeper into the economics of venture? What areas do you wish you understood better? Was it deal economics, fund economics, or both? And I'm assuming this was before launching right now and even VC Unlocked.
Yeah, so what I learned through a VC Unlocked is really, so you think like $10 million fund, cool. You're on the 2 and 20 model. Okay, great. So you get 20% of carried interest. That comes like 13 years later, right? And so then you're working off of your 2% management fees. Your 2% management fee is $200,000 a year. $200,000 a year. Let's say you got to pay for some back office support. So let's say you're on Angels list. So that's probably $20,000 to $25,000 a year. You get a lawyer. Let's say your lawyer's another $20,000 a year. And you might need an accountant, you know, separate of the Angels list just to make sure in case you get audits or anything that may or may not come through your bank. So that's another, you know, 25, 30 a year. So really quickly, we've gotten to 75,000 to 100,000 a year in back office support. That's gone. You got 100K left to write your fund. It's not a lot. And so now when you think about the fund has 8 million left for you to actually invest. But now in cases you can negotiate for some of those back office stuff to be paid for out of the fund. Okay, so let's say I take that 100K a year out of the fund. Well, that equals out to $1 million over 10 years. And I still get my 200,000 to manage the firm and do all that. So now instead of having 8 million to invest, I have 7 million to invest. And so I now need to get to some kind of multiple over the size of the fund. So like if you can do 2x of the fund, 2x multiple of the fund, you double your size of your fund in returns, you're doing really well, right? But remember, I talked about raising a $10 million fund, but I only got 7 million to invest. So even if I take that 7 million and turn it into 14 million, that's only 4 million over the 10. Like I'm benchmarked on the 10, not the amount of money I actually invest, right? And so like the bar creeps higher and higher as you go. And so understanding that, and also understanding like the cost of how much these back office support costs, you know, how much are you going to pay a year? And then, you know, even at 200,000, let's say I pay myself an okay salary. Let's say I pay myself 100K a year. I still 100K I have left for expenses. And let's say I want to bring on an associate. Let's say I pay that associate 50. All right, I got 50K a year as wiggle room for all the travel that I'm going to do, for all my services. Let's say you get PitchBook. PitchBook could be, you know, 10, 15 grand a year, right? Like the money gets eaten up really, really, really quickly. And like understanding that's really like, and that's why you've realized a lot of people starting these micro funds are already independently wealthy and have the ability to sustain themselves for the first 3-4 years, because the hope is you raise a bigger fund within 3 to 4 years using, you know, the companies you've already invested in, and then you can pay yourself more. You know, the management fees start to make more sense. But like I didn't understand that stuff as acutely when I went through. And also when you look at when you model out a fund, it's all about unicorn hunting. If you have a thesis around getting, you know, singles and doubles, like just going to get, you know, a couple million exit here, a couple million exit over there, that don't work. The money just doesn't work. It's just like the returns just do not work.
Great, thank you. And on that theme, could you also talk about some of the biggest takeaways from VC Unlocked that you experienced last year? Since I know the audience we have a lot of people interested in the program this fall.
So that was one thing I learned at VC Unlocked. Another thing that VC Unlocked forced me to do, because also like I've been writing checks for a couple of years before I got the VC Unlocked. So like, some of the negotiation things and going over term sheets. I knew a lot of that stuff, but I got to dive deeper and get to hear people from different perspectives. But VC Unlocked forces you to also write a deck. I had never done a pitch deck for raising a fund. That was completely new. And like that deck, if I look at it today, like, man, whew. But it gave me my initial framework for what I was going to use going forward. But probably the most valuable thing you get out of VC Unlocked is your classmates. So to this day, me and my entire class have a WhatsApp group where we literally write to each other several times a week. It's been a year and we still write to each other all the time. We support each other, we share deals, we share wins. It is amazing. We have like a bi-weekly, call where we meet up with each other. Like those things matter. I was in a class, I think it was like 53 of us from representing 21 countries. I had never met investors from other countries. There was a whole contingency from Cambodia and got to hear about like how they make investments in Cambodia. Like I never would have thought of. Granted, for the virtual one, you won't get this experience. So what I will tell you is, if you get in and go through the virtual program, spend time getting to meet every single one of your classmates one-to-one. You'll find people you really click with. You'll find people with unique strategies and thought processes. Like spend the time to grow your network with your classmates, because also my first check written into my fund came from one of my classmates. A good portion of my first $2 million raise is coming from classmates from VC Unlocked, right? People who got to see me, who got to know me, who got to see my strategy, who got to, learn who I was as an investor. Like that was so powerful. But I will say, I lived in an Airbnb in Palo Alto with 4 other grown men, 2 from Russia, 1 from Norway, and 1 from Portugal. Did we have some really cool conversations about investing in Bitcoin? Like those men taught me so much about Bitcoin. Oh, they are making me money. Like Bitcoin's doing really well right now. Those guys are making, like Bitcoin was like like 8,000 back then. Ooh, they making me so much money. I had written that kind of stuff, and you learn so many other perspectives and learn about companies from all over the globe. Like that is the most powerful thing. Like, and also I will say, like, there's a teacher who was in the class at Stanford who calls me a peer now, and who I can call on as an advisor. Like I can talk to a Stanford professor and call on him as a mentor. Like it's just really cool. And I can wear my Stanford shirt and like kind of flex on people now.
Absolutely. But I mean, just talking about those relationships, I just wanted to say, don't worry about that for this online cohort. We're really looking forward to being intentional about how we facilitate that. Because like you said, this is very important to this class and something that we are going to continue in the online version. So we're excited about that as well. I think we'll have time for one last question. So I think let's go with, how do you successfully fundraise during a global pandemic and financial crisis? I think that's a big question for a lot of people right now. Thanks, Mac.
Oddly enough, it's been easier, not harder, just because you can do all your meetings through Zoom. Like generally speaking, a lot of investors or LPs want to get to meet you. They want to spend time with you. They want to get to know you. And so they need you to fly to them and like spend time with them. I've been able to close some LPs with like just over Zoom calls, or we'll have multiple Zoom calls. They'll do bi-weekly calls with me to check up, see how I'm doing. I send them, bi-weekly updates kind of a thing. And that's been enough to get them over the hump. Under normal circumstances, this would have been really rough because I wouldn't have been able to get in touch with everybody. I'd have been on a lot of planes. I wouldn't have been able to have nearly as many meetings. And, especially for the meetings that aren't fruitful, like a 30-minute call, Zoom call to get to know is a lot different than, getting on a plane, staying somewhere for a day, going out to expensive lunches and everything to get to know. Give me a no over Zoom. It's a lot easier and faster, right? So it's actually been easier, but that's only because the market stays stable. If the markets start to fluctuate, if we start to see the capital markets start to act weird, I think it will get harder because people will start to hold on to their money, right? And they'll hold on to money that they can liquidate quickly. Money in the market, you can liquidate fairly quickly. Money in a venture firm, yeah, baby. We in here for 10, 13, maybe even 15 years. And you know what? The 15-year thing happens when you invest in a great company like Uber, and it's like year 5 of your fund, and so it's like the last check you write, but then Uber takes another 10 years to exit, well, that means your fund just lasts an extra 5 years longer than you plan to. And that means you waited another 5 years longer before you got that check. So, there's nothing LPs can do about that. And they know that. You should know that too. Like, don't just think like you get your carry after 10 years. You can get it earlier, or you can get it much later. Or you could get none. That happens too. Not every fund returns their fund.
You have time for one more question. I actually saw one that I thought might be a good way to end. More on the founder side, but I think talking about your opinion on the warm intro, and if you are meeting with founders, what can a founder do to reach out to you? What's the best way? I think we have 1 or 2 logged in. So just ending on that note, and then we'll close it out. Thank you.
I can probably guess who asked that question too. I'm pretty sure I can guess who asked that question. So this industry does work on warm intros, right? Most of the investors will tell you they need some kind of filter for you to get to them. One, because we just get inundated, right? If you go on LinkedIn and put up that you're an investor, just watch your chat and everything just go to hell. Like it's just it gets crazy. But what you find is the warm intros end up leaving out entrepreneurs who don't have networks. When I started, I didn't have a network. Several of the founders I backed didn't have networks. And so I was their network. I made the investment and I gave them a network. Well, if they didn't have a way to get to me, that doesn't happen. And so for me, I'm all for getting rid of warm intros, right? Like founders can just reach out to me directly. The founder that's led me to raise a fund literally sent me a message on Twitter, right? Do I get to every DM or every entrepreneur who reaches out to me? I don't. I get like 30 to 40 emails a day. I get, 20 to 30 DMs. I get like a couple LinkedIn messages, like there's only so much time in a day. So do I hit them all? No, but I definitely encourage people to just reach out to me. And a lot of investors will tell you, don't put up an application form on your website because you're going to get crappy deal flow. And a lot of it's going to be noise. But when you find the right one, that's where it doesn't matter how much noise you have to go through if you find a company that returns your fund, right? Like if you're the first investor in a company that does really well and returns the fund, and you had to go through listening or reading like 500 or 600 decks to find that company, so what? At the end of the day, our job is to return capital. And so if that means I got to get creative about how I go about finding that company, then I'm going to do it, right? Because like 75% of venture funds don't 2x their fund, right? Like those are just the numbers. So if you do 2x the size of your fund, you're in the top quartile of all venture funds in your vintage in most years. And if that means you had to have a founder like hound you and chase you down on Twitter, cool. Like don't turn that founder away because you never know what you could miss out on. And so for me, warm intros don't have to be there. Do I take warm intros? Yeah, because I have a network. Like that's what's going to happen. But I'm not solely reliant on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Mac, for your time. Thank you, Veggie. We're going to be sending out a recording for all of the people who registered. So you'll get that afterwards if you want to rewatch in case you missed something. And just a final reminder that we do have early applications and scholarship deadlines for VC Unlock Silicon Valley Online that are due this Friday, the 21st. And of course,
fill out the application, y'all.
Yes.
We'll do it.
Exactly. And if you have any other questions, please reach out to our team or at vcunlocked@500startups.com. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye. Take care.
Thank you, Matt.
Everybody.